guess there is less because it is less of a problem. I guess one of my big concerns is that we need to be putting our efforts where the need is, and men are at risk of violence in public. I guess the David Hooks affair is a really typical example. It seems that very often, particularly young men who are out doing pretty well, minding their own business, can be exposed to these like displays of dominance that can quickly escalate into the mean, bashed, killed, hurt. And it seems if we're thinking about prevention of violence, where it's most needed, for women it's in their private relationships, for men it's in their public relationships with other men. I don't know if you want to say anything about that.
Can I just add to that? Sometimes I suggest a great crime prevention strategy is to introduce a curfew for all men and the opposite for women, so that after 6 p.m. all men must go home and all women must go out.
I guess I wanted to also respond in the context of gay male relationships, because gay men experience violence on the street, and we know that under the New South Wales Police Service statistics that gay men are 6 to 8 times more likely to experience street violence than non-gay men. So that experience of community and public violence is absolutely a problem for our community. But in the context of our relationships, violence in gay male relationships also happens and also occurs. And the one theme that, if we can draw anything out of the statistics, is we're not actually talking about a small group of men, we're actually talking about a large group of gay men who experience this problem, and we need to understand it better.
The thing that I'd like to pursue further while you've got the microphone there, Anthony, is one of the themes that we've been talking about is the definitional nature of how we talk about domestic violence. And many of the panellists have talked about having a feminist analysis of domestic violence. How does that feminist analysis sit for examining gay domestic violence?
I think on one hand it sits very well, and on the other hand it doesn't. The reason why I think it sits really well is because I think that the lessons that we've been able to learn from a feminist analysis is around the use of gender as a tactic of power and control. And I think that there are certainly instances where we can talk about the use of gender in the context of gay male domestic violence very clearly. Where it's maybe more complex is that the analysis can be used to distract from the issue. So I've heard my colleagues talk about domestic violence is about male violence against women, and so therefore it's not possible for gay men to experience domestic violence. One of the things my colleague Pat Turney, who's sitting in the audience, has helped me to understand is, in the context of domestic violence and power and control, that there's additions to gender, that there's race, disability, financial status, employment status, and so those intersections can also be used to dominate and to control, and I think in that sense that's helpful because that applies to gay male relationships.
Well, I think the feminist analysis sits very well because what I often refer to as lesbophobia and lesbophobic crimes and hate crimes, and that is the intersection of anti-woman violence and anti-lesbian violence, and I think that that's the difference for lesbians between lesbians and gay men, in that gay men don't have to deal with the misogyny and the sexism that women have to deal with. And so, in fact, the Attorney General's Department in New South Wales did some research last year called You Shouldn't Have to Hide to Be Safe, and in that, I mean, that's not talking about domestic violence, it's talking about the sorts of violent experiences that lesbians and gay men experience in New South Wales. And the differences there were that lesbians experienced violence near their homes and near their workplaces, and that over 75% of those women identified that gender was a contributing factor to their assault, whereas the gay men who were assaulted in the same research, only a few of them identified that gender had anything to do with their assault. So again, the feminist analysis of putting it in where there is a total power differentiation between men and women in our society and the institutions that support that, then in fact it is that a whole feminist analysis actually really supports the way that we work with lesbian violence as opposed to gay men's same-sex violence.
Just to sort of build on what Leslie was saying earlier, by looking at what services, what range of domestic violence is coming to services or what's being identified. The other way is kind of often general population studies, and in the area of dating violence, as well as a lot of, say, health department, crime study type surveys, where they're looking at what is the percentage of this problem in the community. One of the common things that is used, or a common tool for measurement, is called the conflict tactics scale, which was originally developed by Murray Strauss, and is kind of like all sort of psychological tools now on version 7, etc. One of the issues, when we use that in a population study, what we normally find is the balance between male and female is anywhere between 50 to 50 or 30% male, 70% female. So we see a much higher rate when we use conflict tactics scales across the community compared to looking at health studies, etc., or service delivery.
So what you're saying, Donna, is when you're saying 50-50, you're saying using that tool has the net result of there being a finding that men and women are equally violent?
Yeah, so that can be one of the interpretations of the tool at a very literal level. And so for a lot of people, their argument is, well, the reason for that difference between service usage and population studies, the difference for that percentage is because people don't want to come out and speak about their violence. So it's all about hidden violence. I'd actually disagree with that on a number of levels. And one of the problems with the conflict tactics scale is it doesn't differentiate between whether it was a kind of offensive or defensive act of violence. So literally, if somebody goes to punch you in the face and you shove them out the way, you're 1 each. You would score 1 each on that scale. So we don't have any sense of who the primary aggressor is, nor the context, nor the effects. So we just have some very raw, basic data, which often doesn't tell us very much. So that's one of the problems with that. In terms of the issue about people underreporting, and that's why my argument is that men and women all underreport. You know, so men, women, heterosexual, same-sex relationships, across the board there's underreporting. People aren't coming forward because of the public shame associated with being a victim of intimate violence. So that's an issue for everybody, not necessarily that imbalanced in a sense.